The tape hissed, and the 11-year-old raised his hand. "That's not my voice." 3 heads turned at the mixing board. The engineer nearest the console leaned back, adjusting his headphones with one finger. The producer, a man who'd worked with Marvin Gaye and Smokey Robinson, crossed his arms. The assistant, barely older than 20, glanced at the reel-to-reel machine and then at the kid standing 5 feet from the glass. "Run it again," the producer said. The tape looped. Strings swelled through the monitors, then a voice, clear, aching, impossibly mature for a child. The ballad wrapped around the room like smoke. Every note landed, every word cut. Michael shook his head. "It's too high." "Kid, we just recorded this an hour ago." The engineer tapped the VU meters with his knuckle. "Levels are clean, tape's fresh. You sang it perfect." "I know I sang it perfect." Michael stepped closer to the board, his sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. "But that's not how it came out of my mouth." The assistant engineer smirked, then caught himself. The producer exhaled through his nose and hit the intercom. "Michael, you want to do another take?" "No." The boy's eyes stayed on the spinning reels. "I want you to check the machine." One look, one breath, one decision. The room held. The producer glanced at the engineer. The engineer glanced at the tape deck. Nobody moved. This was Motown 1970. The equipment was studio-grade, maintained weekly, calibrated by professionals who'd been doing this since before this kid was born. And now a 5th grader in a striped shirt was telling them their machine was broken. "Michael." The producer's voice softened, the way adults speak when they're about to explain something obvious. "The machine's fine. We've been using it all week." "Then why does it sound like I'm singing in the wrong key?" "You're not in the wrong." "I am. It's sharp, not by much." Michael tilted his head as if listening to something only he could hear. "Maybe half a step, maybe less, but it's not me." The assistant engineer leaned over and whispered something to his boss. The older man waved him off. "We don't have time for this. We've got 3 more songs to lay down today." But here's the part you can't miss. Michael didn't move. He stood there, hands at his sides, weight on one foot, waiting. Not defiant, not loud, just certain. The producer rubbed his temples. "Fine. We'll check it. Happy?" "Thank you." The engineer hit the stop button. The reels clicked to a halt. He stood, walked to the tape machine and crouched beside it. His fingers traced the capstan, the pinch roller, the tension arms. Everything looked normal. He pressed play. The tape rolled. He pressed stop. The tape stopped. No slippage. No wobble. "See?" He looked back at Michael through the glass. "Nothing's wrong." Michael pointed at the machine. "Check the speed." The engineer paused. The assistant engineer stood up straighter. The producer uncrossed his arms. "The speed," Michael repeated. "It's running too fast." Now the room shifted. The engineer pulled a small strobe disc from a drawer beneath the console, a calibration tool used to verify playback speed by matching rotating marks to a reference pattern under specific light. He placed it on the tape deck spindle, flipped a switch, and leaned in close. The marks blurred. He adjusted his angle. The marks steadied, then blurred again. Behind him, the assistant engineer leaned forward. The producer set down his pen. Michael stood motionless at the glass, watching. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed. The studio felt smaller than it had 5 minutes ago. The engineer straightened, exhaled through his teeth, and looked at the console. Then he looked at Michael. Then he looked back at the strobe disc. His jaw tightened. "How much?" the producer asked. 3%, maybe 4. The assistant engineer's mouth opened, then closed. The producer's pen rolled off the edge of the legal pad and hit the floor. Nobody picked it up. Silence. Not the kind that comes from waiting. The kind that comes from realizing a child just caught something you didn't. The kind that makes you rethink every decision you made that day. The kind that sits in your chest like a weight. The assistant engineer's smirk was gone. The producer stared at Michael through the glass. The boy stared back, calm, patient, like he'd known the whole time and was just waiting for everyone else to catch up. "Fix it," the producer said. The engineer adjusted a small control on the side of the tape machine. A speed trim pot, rarely touched, almost never miscalibrated. He ran the strobe test again. This time, the marks held steady. "Play it," Michael said. The tape rolled. The strings came back. The voice returned, and this time when the first note hit, the room exhaled. It was the same performance, the same words, the same phrasing, but now it sat in the pocket. Now it sounded like the voice that had filled the studio an hour earlier. Now it sounded like Michael. The producer leaned back in his chair. The assistant engineer stared at the machine. The head engineer set the strobe disc down slowly, as if placing something fragile. "How did you know?" the producer asked. Michael shrugged. "I just heard it." "1 second, don't skip this part. This wasn't about arrogance. It wasn't about proving adults wrong. It was about the sound. Michael had sung the song. He knew every note. He knew how his voice felt in his chest when he hit the high run in the second verse. He knew the exact frequency of the ad-lib at the bridge. And when the playback didn't match that internal map, when the pitch shifted by a few hertz, when the timbre altered by a fraction, he knew something was off. Most singers wouldn't have caught it. Most producers wouldn't have either. But Michael wasn't most singers. The engineer sat back down at the console. He didn't say anything, but his hands moved differently now. Slower, more deliberate. He checked the meters twice before cueing the next track. He glanced at the tape machine, then at Michael, then back at the meters. The assistant engineer glanced at Michael with something close to respect. He pulled out a maintenance log from under the console and flipped to the last entry. 3 days ago, all systems nominal. He underlined the date, then wrote something in the margin. When he looked up, Michael was watching him through the glass. The producer hit the talkback button. His voice came through softer than before. "You good to keep going?" "Yeah." "All right, let's do the next one." But the energy in the room had changed. The tape rolled. The musicians tuned. The lights dimmed for the next take. And when Michael sang, everyone listened a little closer. Not because they doubted him, because they didn't. What you heard was only the surface. Underneath the 12-bar intro, and the string arrangement and the 4-track mix was something most people don't talk about. The difference between talent and precision. Talent is hitting the note. Precision is knowing when the note's been altered by 3% tape speed variance and being able to articulate that to a room full of adults who think you're just a kid. The session ran another 4 hours. They laid down 2 more songs. Michael nailed every take. The engineers adjusted levels, checked speeds, recalibrated machines they thought were already perfect. Nobody questioned him again. Between takes, the head engineer walked over to the tape machine 3 separate times. He'd crouch, squint at the speed control, run his finger along the capstan shaft. The 3rd time, the assistant asked what he was looking for. "Making sure," the engineer said. "Of what?" "That we don't miss something else." The assistant nodded. He understood, they both did. This wasn't about the machine anymore. It was about the 11-year-old sitting on the other side of the glass, who heard things they couldn't. When the session wrapped, the head engineer packed up his cables in silence. The assistant engineer turned off the monitors, 1 channel at a time, watching the needles drop to 0. The producer scribbled notes on a legal pad, circling the words "absolute pitch" twice, then underlining them. Michael sat on a stool in the corner, swinging his legs, waiting for his father to pick him up. His feet didn't touch the floor. He could still hear the last vocal track in his head, the harmony stack they'd recorded 40 minutes ago, the way the second and third voices locked in. He replayed it internally, adjusting the EQ in his mind. He wasn't thinking about what he'd done. He was thinking about the next song, about the harmony stack they'd try tomorrow, about whether the reverb on the bridge should be shorter, or if the delay should sit further back in the mix. Notice the shift. He wasn't proud. He wasn't embarrassed. He was just ready for the next thing. The assistant engineer walked past him on the way out. He stopped, hesitated, then looked down. "Hey, that was really something." Michael looked up. "Thanks. How old are you?" 11. The assistant nodded slowly, like he was doing math in his head, calculating how many 11-year-olds could do what this one just did. The answer was 0, or close enough. "See you tomorrow," the assistant said. "See you." The door clicked shut. The studio fell quiet. The tape reels sat still. The lights hummed, and somewhere in the back of the room, a machine that had been running 3% too fast all week sat perfectly calibrated, waiting for the next session. Wait, here's the moment it changed. Not in that session, not even that week, but in every session after. Because once the engineers knew Michael could hear the difference between 440 Hz and 453 Hz, once they understood he wasn't guessing, he was right, they started treating him differently. Not like a child star, like a musician. The head engineer started double-checking tape speeds before every session. The assistant engineer began asking Michael's opinion on mic placement. "Does this sound boxy to you?" Michael would listen, then answer, and he was usually right. By the time Michael turned 12, he was sitting in on mixing sessions. By 13, he was suggesting arrangement changes. By 15, he was co-producing. And it all started here, in a room where a kid raised his hand and said, "That's not my voice." Remember, he was still a kid. He still went home and watched cartoons. He still got in trouble with his brothers. He still had to ask permission to stay up late. But in the studio, he was something else. He was the person who heard what no one else could. The person who stopped the session. The person who was right. The producer kept those session notes in a manila folder marked J5, 1970. Years later, after Michael became the biggest star on the planet, a music journalist doing a retrospective on Motown's golden era asked what he remembered most about working with young Michael Jackson. The producer pulled out that folder. He opened it to the page with absolute pitch circled twice. He didn't talk about the hits. He didn't talk about the performances. He talked about the day an 11-year-old stopped the playback and said, "Check the speed." "That's when I knew," the producer said. Not that he'd be famous, that he'd be great. The journalist asked what the difference was. "Famous is luck and timing," the producer said. "Great is knowing the tape speed's wrong when nobody else in the room can hear it." Because fame is about the audience. Greatness is about the work. And Michael cared about the work. The playback started again, and the room listened. Not to a child, not to a star, to the sound, the way it was supposed to be, the way Michael heard it, the way it would sound on the record that would sell millions, played on radios across the world, sung by people who'd never stepped foot in a studio but who'd feel every note the way Michael felt it when he sang it. Because the speed was wrong, and he knew, and he said so. And that's the story.